Welcome back, David. You look like you are hibernating inside, which kind of brings us to the topic of the week. Cortisol, neurotransmitters, and probably how it links into change of seasons, how it affects us, what's happening, and probably a carry on from last week's topic about hormones as well. What is the difference between the topic of last week and this week?
Yeah, so this week we're going to talk a little bit more specifically about the change that's happening, which is most people that watch our channel live in the northern hemisphere. We're going into winter. So as you notice, the days are getting shorter. Even right now, normally, in the summer, sun would already have been up for an hour. Now it's not up yet, right? So still dark outside. Which then goes to most people live in lifestyles that are very habitual, meaning they like to get in a rhythm of I do this at this time of the day, and that's kind of that, and they try to maintain that. And for the most part, most people don't have a choice, right? They have to go to a job, and that job requires a specific time to be there or whatever, right? So everybody gets into this rhythm where even though the day will change because of the season, you don't change anything that you do. And some of the things that are helpful, like lighting, for example, depending on how you choose to interact with lighting at the bookends of the day specifically, that can induce a stressful response. We'll talk a little bit about that. But those types of little things that don't seem like they make a big difference, and they really don't in the short term. A week or two of just turning on the lights in the morning for 2 hours before the sun comes up, or in the evening before, is probably not going to cause that big of a problem. It's that it's going to happen for the next 3 to 4 months that's the problem, right? That's what I want to highlight, and that's kind of the goal of this video today, is to highlight a couple of things, right? Mainly we're going to be talking about changes that happen in that short time frame of a month to 2 to 3 months, which most of the time is not hormonal, right? Last video, we talked about hormones, specifically sex hormones. Those are more of like a consistent, 2 to 3 years of just bad habits compounded, year after year after year. Dopamine, neurotransmitters, cortisol, those are the things we're going to be talking today. Those are more acute. Those are governed by acute actions every day, right? So, for example, we'll talk about the cortisol cascade. The cortisol cascade happens on a diurnal rhythm, right? So that's every day your cortisol is going to fluctuate quite a lot. Usually it should be the highest in the morning. It's not always like that. We'll talk about the things that disrupt that. But the way it should look under natural conditions is the sun comes up, it starts to become light. That the types of light that come off of morning sunlight activate certain retinal pathways in the brain and through the eye, and through the skin, all of those at the same time. They're called melanopsin specifically, and rhodopsin. They're opsins, and they're located on all tissues in the eye and on the skin, and recently have also been found inside blood vessels, right? All of those come from amphibians, and they are light sensing things. So just like the cones and the rods in your eyes, they are light sensing opsins. They sense this morning light, and they activate a response to wake up. And this actually starts earlier than sunrise. Like if you've tuned your circadian rhythm correctly, you've gotten up with the sun regularly, this cortisol wave response starts to happen probably an hour before sunrise. And that's actually what wakes you up. Most people that have kind of follow kind of our lifestyle will notice that they tend to wake up without an alarm clock basically all the time, usually around sunrise, usually a little bit before. That action is facilitated through this process of your body anticipating, hey, there's sunrise coming. We're going to be waking up. Cortisol starts to rise. That's what wakes you up from your sleep. And it continues to rise, especially as you get daylight stimulation, to its peak sometime in that first 2 hours of the morning. And it should slowly taper off throughout the day until it's quite low and you're going to be going to bed because melatonin is coming up, right? That's the normal circadian response. Most people associate cortisol with stress. They're not necessarily wrong, right? Being alive during the day is a stress, and then you're going to recover from it during the day. Cortisol is there to facilitate just being active and energetic, right? You are a diurnal creature, so it's coupled with daylight. It can be shifted if you work swing shift or night shift, or just tend to have bad circadian habits. You know, you wake up late in the morning, you don't really go outside until noon, you stay up until midnight. You'll shift your cortisol wave, right, into more towards the evening, right? So the biggest spike of cortisol is towards the evening. That is actually a problem because you're going to drive everything that makes you active. That's semi-dehydrated, right? So like being active is a dehydration type state. Even though you might be drinking, cells are doing things, right? They're working, they're making metabolic waste, etc. Things are working. That is a state that you have to recover from a cellular hydration perspective. Now, under daylight conditions, that's not a problem, right? Being active and having a high cortisol level during daylight hours means theoretically you should be interacting with some level of infrared light from the sun, some level of UV light from the sun. So those are fueling the hydration replenishment sequence that's caused by activating biology through the cortisol response. So it's taken care of. Essentially, the problem of high level cortisols and being very active is taken care of by the environment that you should be interacting with. Does that make sense so far? Now, we'll move that forward 2 or 3 months from now, right? You wake up, you turn on, your lights for a couple hours because the sun's not up when you wake up. You do the same routine that you normally do, and then you go to work, and so on. You haven't initiated any of those cascades other than the cortisol response, because blue light activates the cortisol response the hardest, right? So artificial light will spike the cortisol as if it is noon, right? So middle of the day, right? So your body gets a big jolt of cortisol in the morning. And then what usually ends up happening is there's a lull, meaning you're either going to go drive to work, right, in twilight hour or something like that. And so there's almost like a deactivation of being awake. Now you feel good still and everything. You make it to work, and then you walk into, your office or wherever you're going to be, and boom, you get another spike because that place is probably going to be brighter than your home. Right. So you're going to get another cortisol spike somewhere around, I don't know, 9 a.m. to 8 a.m., whenever you show up to work. So you've had a double cortisol spike, and it's really high now, and it's about going to, 10 a.m., 12 a.m. Now, so far, so good. It's not a big deal, except for you're going to run into that brain fog / low energy state around 2 p.m. Why is that going to happen? Because you're going to stay inside all day long. Right. So you've initiated the cortisol spike, you've been active all day, but you're not getting infrared light, you're not getting UV light. So it means at the cellular level, you're losing energy. You're losing the ability to conduct electricity in the right places in the mitochondria because they're being actively dehydrated because you're not making cellular water from infrared light that would normally passively fuel that circumstance. Right. So then you end up 6 hours into the day and you feel like you're running on empty, right? You have a little brain fog going. You technically have ate food. You should feel fine. And the only thing you can reach for is caffeine or something. And the reason is your brain just feels like it's running in slow motion. Why is that happening? Because of this cellular dehydration acutely causes a drop in voltage in your ability to electrify your brain. And so you're feeling brain fog. And so sometimes people will catch on to that and drink a bunch of electrolytes and water and stuff like that, and they'll feel better. That tells you, that's a clue. That's a clue that tells you at the cellular level, you are not keeping up with the demands of the metabolic processes that are going on. Now, synthetically, you could do that by hyperhydrating. I just mentioned that if you feel that, maybe you should have some water with electrolytes, but meaning if you already know that it's going to be an absence of hydration from an outside input, you should already be front running that with extra hydration for the day if you're going to be inside all day. That's one of the strategies in the winter. The point being, that's why you'll run into brain fog a lot more often in the winter than than in the summertime. And then, you get done with work, you might drive home or drive to the gym or drive home or whatnot, right? And at that point, you kind of get your second wind. Why? Because you leave work. You leave work, stress kind of relieves itself, and usually you'll spend some time outside. Even in the winter, most people either tend to, go for a little walk after work when they get home or at the gym. People kind of intuitively feel that they need to de-stress, right? Not always, but they sometimes do that and they get a little bit of a second wind and then they can kind of keep up. And then what ends up happening is they go home, they cook dinner, it's dark at night, right? It's dark already. They're cooking dinner, they turn on all the lights, they get a third cortisol spike in the evening, and now they can't sleep very well because the cortisol spike is now continuing on into like 7 or 8 o'clock in the evening, when that whole time it should actually be quite low and your melatonin should be coming up. Do that for a week or two, you're just going to feel a little bit run down. Do that for a month or two, you're going to feel some depression type symptoms. Even at that point, I would say you would probably be able to be clinically classified as seasonally depressed. And the reason is because you're depleting a lot of resources, keeping the system running in that particular fashion, right? So solutions, what do we do about that? So far, do you have any questions?
Oh, I had some questions before you even opened up about if you want to list the benefits of cortisol before it's all like, oh, it's
Yeah,
gonna
yeah, yeah,
deplete you
yeah,
and
yeah.
all that kind of.
Yeah. So, but well, so far, I've only really listed benefits, right? The problem isn't the cortisol, right? If you've paid attention to the kind of what I painted, the normal function of cortisol is one big homogeneous spike. The last most half of the day comes down nice and smooth. That is normal, 100% normal, and you should feel absolutely fantastic if that's how your cortisol spike is going. And I can tell that if it does go that way, you're probably doing some things correctly already, right? You're probably getting some morning daylight, spiking it correctly. You're probably not stressing yourself too much in terms of synthetic lighting early in the day or in the evening. You're doing a lot of things right if your cortisol spike looks like that. The problem isn't the cortisol, it's the timing, right? So even a really large spike in the morning probably actually means that you're probably coping with some kind of a dynamic stressor. It could be training related, it could be job related, right? It's an adaptation, right? Cortisol is an allowance. It's kind of like fuel to go to war, essentially, right? It's fuel to execute on the task at hand. So if you're making a lot of it in the morning, that's not necessarily a red flag if you're in a high performance mode, right? And same thing with low cortisol. It could be that you're in recovery mode and your body is actually trying to slow down some stress that might be accumulating, right? So a lot of people get that mixed up. So I'm glad that you brought that up. It's not about the level of the cortisol. Is there such a thing as too high or too low? Yes, but I mean that range is really, really large because the human body has a lot of range of capabilities when it comes to consciousness. Now, the thing that's a problem is the consecutive spikes and dips and spikes and dips multiple times throughout the day, because cortisol is kind of one of the core. It's not the core, but it's a feedback mechanism to one of the core circadian mechanisms. So if it gets messed up, it actually pushes down on melatonin. And if melatonin gets squashed too much at the wrong time of the day, your sleep gets messed up. That's the problem with cortisol, is that say you had 2 or 3 spikes throughout the day and only throughout the day, that would probably be normal. That would be totally fine. It's the spikes that happen way too early in the day and way too early, late in the evening, that really start to disrupt the circadian mechanism. And then at the end of that, the reason why it's disrupting it, which is what I mentioned, is this dehydration state, right?
And let's be honest, it's
That's
pretty much everyone.
right. Correct. Right. Like it's going to be a lot of people. That's why I'm saying like this is very valuable to understand going into the winter for anybody. Right. So I think we can kind of leave like the reasons why you want to mitigate those, right? Like why we want to make it more homogeneous, why we don't want it in the evening, and the secondary consequence or the reason why the cortisol stuff is happening is the dehydration part, right? You're causing a cortisol spike under a dehydration state, and there's no sunlight or uh, infrared energy to cause cellular hydration or cellular ATP at a higher level. So you just kind of feel low energy. Now, if that goes on for long enough in that dehydration state, you start depleting melanin into dopamine, right? So I'm going to show a slide real quick.
And for anyone who's watching, you basically explained the cost of stress, what it causes, what it drains, how energy mismanagement uh, can affect us in the long run, like just relying on caffeine, relying on screens, relying on doing something that kind of gives you a boost, but in reality is that daily habit of being exposed to natural lights or infrared light like you are doing now at home when you're inside, and because there is no sun yet out, uh, can actually be something that can alleviate unnecessary like energy dip later in the day that we can easily avoid, but we don't because we are so disconnected living the way we lived just a couple decades ago.
Yeah. And so again, it really isn't even that it's your fault or anything like that. It's just that the world has changed enough. We have just failed to change our behaviors to adapt to it, right? Think of it like you're living habitually, consistently. So basically, you're just doing habits on top of habits, but you're not living intentionally, meaning you're not thinking about what do I need and what do I have to do. It kind of gets to that point with some of the stuff that we talk about. When I lay it out, like I'm just about to, once you understand it, you're like, oh yeah, that's obvious. I just have to do that. And it doesn't, it's not ridiculously weird or anything. It's just, you don't do it anymore because you haven't really been told that that's a major thing that needs to be taken into account. So if we look at this slide here, where it says here, UVA light controls melanin renovation in mammals, right? If we look at that first section, we see phenylalanine and tyrosine, the two green ones on the left there. And eventually, through sunlight hitting these in the gut, they turn into dopamine and melanin over on the far right. Dopamine and melanin and adrenaline, noradrenaline, those are all neurotransmitters, right? Some people have probably heard of adrenaline when you're excited, and dopamine, they associate it with feeling good, but really it's a hormone of pattern recognition, right? And then below that we have tryptophan. That's another amino acid turning into serotonin. Most people have heard of serotonin, especially if you have depression or any of those types of things. That is going to be circumvented or lower down. You might get put on an SSRI, for example. That's a serotonin reuptake inhibitor. Then we have the final one, histidine, at the bottom, and that amino acid eventually turns into uric acid or histamine. This controls like allergic responses and some nitric oxide inhibition, depending on some other circumstances. But nonetheless, these are all amino acids. All four of these are amino acids. So number one, right, going into the winter season is, are you eating enough protein that you have this set of amino acids, kind of in your stomach all the time? Now, the other thing to kind of understand here is photosynthesis or sunlight has to interact with these at some level. Biophotons have to interact with these at some level. These all have UV light spectrum reception, meaning they absorb UV light. Phenylalanine, tyrosine, tryptophan, and histidine all absorb UV light in the 200 all the way up to like 320, somewhere in there. Those are only going to come from sunlight hitting your stomach or from cold exposure. Recent studies have shown that cold exposure activates at a much harder degree, a much more ramped up degree, biophoton stimulation in all mitochondria and all other bacteria. So basically your gut, right? Your gut is going to start signaling a lot harder in terms of the biophotons that it emits in relationship to the amino acids that it's digesting, right? Because that's where all of this is happening. It's happening in the gut. And a lot of people kind of, if you've ever Googled, where dopamine gets made or serotonin gets made, you'll find that most of it gets made in the gut, right? The reason it makes it to your brain is through the the vagus nerve, right? So that type of signaling that when people talk about this, dopamine in the brain and stuff like that, the reason it's being deposited there or entering the blood-brain barrier there is through the gut and how the gut and the brain connect.
So this
That
brings
particular
it back
process.
to our other videos where we talk about food quality, why food quality is so important, and everyone is like it's like I just had a trip, I lost a lot of weight, and I need to regain a lot of weight. The majority of people would be like, let's eat a lot of donuts. I know it's gonna backfire, and I better take it slower, steadier approach, eat my goddamn chicken, rice, and steak, and not try to force something that can compromise not just my gut health, but mental state in case I deplete myself from high quality nutrients, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Right. And that's the other thing, right? Synthetic versions of these might not see if you notice these. I know it's hard to tell, but a lot of these amino acids, right, they're going to have hydrogen molecules in them, right? They're going to have all kinds of other atoms in them. Those, if they're synthetically made, you don't have control of whether the hydrogen is heavy hydrogen or light hydrogen, right? So that's also going to change the spectrum that these put out in terms of the UV light that they absorb, right? So it synthetic food changes the basics of how food works inside the body. That right,
Would
like
would you go
there's
as far as and say that even amino acids in powder form might not be the best choice over real food?
yeah, oh yeah, 100% because of that exact thing, right? Like for example, you can synthesize amino acids completely synthetically, right? So we know that, right? So if
And we know
you
that a
know
lot of people advertise it as like you have amino acid deficiency or whatever the latest term is, and you're like, what are you even talking about?
Yeah, you mean you don't need enough protein? So anyway, point being, right? Like I'm going to highlight just a couple of things right here, right? So this setup right here, this setup right here, these all have hydrogen molecules in these atomic structures. Now there's more that obviously aren't labeled here, but if you're making an amino acid synthetically, you don't have control of what that hydrogen molecule is, whether it's deuterium heavy or light hydrogen, right? Now, in nature is controlling that exact thing, right? Because where are you getting these these amino acids in nature? You're getting them from plants and animals, right? So those plants and animals are outside. If they're outside, that means that the hydrogen molecule in their biology is being controlled by sunlight. So that means, in fact, we know this, right? Tomatoes taste sweeter if they get a lot more deuterium in them, and that deuterium level is dictated by the amount of UV light they get. So if you just reduce the amount of UV light a tomato plant gets, it grows just fine and the tomato grows just fine. But when you taste it, it tastes different. Why? You change the taste by changing the deuterium level because that changes the bonding network of the hydrogen molecule. And what is glucose and fructose? Those are carbons and hydrogens all put together, right? You're changing all of that just by changing the UV light spectrum just for the plant, right? So now think of that. If the plant changes how it tastes, it's definitely going to change not necessarily the structure of the amino acid. The amino acid is still going to be the same, but it's going to change its functionality at the electronic level, at the UV light, at the antenna level, right? So forget that these are amino acids and just envision this. Think of what I just circled right there as an antenna, right? If you change the little knob at the end of the antenna, it's going to function slightly differently. Trust me on that. That's how antennas work. You don't just put a bunch of things together and call it an antenna. There's specific lengths to things. There's specific shapes to the bend of the wires, all of that. The reason for that is because they're interacting with specific frequencies. You're going to change that very subtly when this is synthetic versus natural, right? So are you going to change that? Yeah, without a doubt. What does that actually end up meaning, like down the road to your life? That's the hard part. We don't really know that, right? Now, can I say that it's going to have no effect? It could, but that's highly unlikely. And so there will be something. But that's really the realm of what we're looking at right now. Because really synthetic foods aren't, I mean, they're not a thing that's been like synthetic amino acids, like at the base level, you're making it completely from chemicals. That's not something that's really existed for not my complete lifetime, right? Like most of it, but not all of it, right? So these are very, very new things that you're going to be, that biology is going to have to interact with. Is there going to be effect? Yes, for sure.
Yeah, it's explains a lot when you go to different place and you kind of eat the same stuff and it tastes completely, it even feels completely different. And
Yeah, yeah,
these
100%.
these
All of
small
that's going to take.
these small things that people I can't say ignoring. They're just not aware of that. Even when I travel and I work a lot with families and whatnot, and they usually have some kind of kid issue. It's not even an issue, but there is something that's happening with that kid, and I look at that. It's behavioral issue of the parent that they just copy. That the kid is
Mhm.
completely fine. He doesn't know any better. It's just he's copying you.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, so that's what the goal of this is, right? So now let's talk about, okay, so that's what's happening, right? That's the reason why mental health and kind of physiological health tends to deteriorate in the winter, just about for everybody, right? No one is immune to it, not even myself, right? Now, are there things that you can do habitually from a lifestyle perspective or a nutritional perspective that can help mitigate some of these things, right? So we kind of know what the thing is, right? You're getting a lack of infrared light and a lack of UV light, right? At the core level, that's what's happening, right? Irrelevant of, whether you're calling it sunlight or synthetic, let's just label it that. That's problem number one. You're not getting enough infrared and you're not getting enough UV when the winter comes because you just tend to be inside more. Okay, fair enough. The next thing that's happening is you're inadvertently tripping the switch of a stress response more frequent than you think, pretty much every day, unknowingly by some habits, right? Obviously, reducing that wherever you can is going to be a net positive, right? And then finally, the third thing is this dehydration effect. Now, a lot of the dehydration effect, if you live in a healthy environment, right? Again, I don't know everybody's environment. That's why I'm saying it that way. But if as long as you're in a electromagnetic field environment that's acceptable, right, in the modern world, you're not right next to a power station, you're not right next to a cell phone tower, right? Semi-normal environment, then the dehydration state usually gets circumvented or helped along significantly by introducing infrared light through a couple different vectors. Sometimes you may need to be proactive about your hydration. So this is just something that you're just going to have to take inventory on yourself. Do you tend to drink? Do you tend to underdrink water? If that's your chronic predisposure, winter is a really bad time for you. You really need to focus in on the water thing. A lot of other people, that water thing isn't really a big deal. Like, for example, for me, I just tend to drink a lot of water anyway. Right? Like that's not really my issue in the winter. I don't stop drinking water or significantly reduce my water. But for some people, it is a big thing, like because they're not feeling hot, they're not feeling cold, they're chronically in the same temperature, right? Because they go from their house to their office to their car, and all three of them are 68 degrees, right? So their body never senses any kind of a reaction other than when maybe they work out in terms of call for thirst. So people tend to underdrink a lot in the winter, and that's a big deal when you know that that's a big thing that influences the outcome of cortisol and dopamine manufacturing. So just being more proactive about hydration and electrolytes in the winter is going to be a big one. Right? So now, what do we plug in to kind of get that fixed, right? Or kind of helped along for as long as possible? Number one, if you're waking up in the morning and you tend to just wake up before, early in the day, but you don't have to be at work, right? Maybe you go to the gym, or maybe you just kind of tend to wake up, get your stuff ready, and go to work, right? Maybe an hour before you need to leave. That's usually most people's morning. They wake up about an hour, maybe 90 minutes before they have to be to work or be taking kids to the school or whatever. And at that point in time is when I would say that's the first hack. The first hack is similar to what I'm doing right here. The sun's not out and you need to get things done. You need to see what you're doing. Lowering the lighting from above lighting and using lamps, some amber light bulbs. Basically, what you want to do is you want to delay that really large cortisol spike that you're going to get from blue artificial light until it lines up more with the day. Right? You
Would
want to
there
delay
would
it as
there
much
be
as
something that you use to track or measure it or even acknowledge if they need something like that? Because more often than not, people will go like, "Oh, I feel great," and then yeah, you drink
yeah,
have Red
yeah.
Bull.
It would be the consistent need for caffeine multiple times throughout the morning. Right?
Right.
Like if you tell me if you forget your coffee, you're going to turn around and go back for your coffee. That's a red flag for me. That tells me that your whole day depends on that really large cortisol spike that you're unknowingly inducing by turning on the lights and keeping them on for an hour and a half before you go to work. That's amplifying the caffeine that you're normally drinking, right?
I've had
Because
people who said me that they can't go to toilet unless they drink lots of coffee.
yeah, so that's another one. Why would that be? I'll tell you why. Because they need such a lot. Like coffee stimulates the colon directly, but guess what else stimulates the colon directly? The cortisol spike and sunlight, literally, or cold exposure, right? So we're going to be going into winter. That's what I'm going to be talking about. Cold exposure also induces the contractions in the stomach and bowel movements and stuff like that, because those are all linked to the circadian response. You're supposed to empty your bowels in the morning. That's a mammal, diurnal mammal thing, right? The things that activate that cortisol response and a couple other things that have to do with light signaling at the uh, I forgot the name of it, but it's the GALT and the immune system right behind the gut. Those signal really hard when you get cold or a lot of infrared light, basically. So morning sunlight on the stomach is going to cause that. And whenever you get cold exposure, you're going to create a lot of infrared light. That's also going to cause that. So that's actually something that I should add on the list. Unable to go to the bathroom without caffeine in the morning is also a key sign that this problem has been happening for quite a while. You're inducing a unnecessarily inaccurate cortisol response. You know, what the shape looks like and all of that, I wouldn't know. I'd have to actually physically listen to what's going on, right? But those are key things. So the dependence on caffeine for actual biological functions like going to the bathroom or just feeling like you're even awake, those are big red flags that this is probably a big problem. That this whole overstimulation, overexcitation in the morning has been going on for a long time. And when you lower it, like you do some red light therapy instead, or reduce that, you'll probably find that it doesn't feel very good for like a day or two. It almost feels like you're too sleepy for the morning because you're not having that ridiculously high cortisol spike that gets amplified over and over again. But after about, I would say 3 or 4 days, you'll probably start to notice two things. When you do go outside, like when you finally leave for work and it's daylight, or when you're finally arriving at work and it's daylight, you're going to feel refreshed, not wired. You're going to feel refreshed. Why? Because you allowed the body to go from a rest state to a complete wakeful state before inducing a stressful response. So on top of that, the managing the light induced cortisol response in the morning. The other thing that I like to tell people, especially in the winter, is skip the caffeine until you've actually arrived at work or gone somewhere. And what you want to do is start hydrating proactively that morning. Right? Does that mean you got to drink a whole bunch of cold water? No, you could drink a hot drink. That's personally what I do. I don't drink quite as much coffee. I usually save it for later, but I drink hot water with uh, some MCT oil and a little bit of protein. So I drink a hot drink, 3 or 4 of them, right? So I get protein in there and I get a lot of hydration. I usually end up drinking about a liter of water in the first hour that I'm awake, but it's usually in the form of hot beverages. I like that. That's totally fine. Um, that's what I tend to push people towards in the morning. Reduce your morning light stress response, reduce the caffeine, hyperhydrate, get some protein. That's like the first real switch that you need to do just consistently every morning in the winter. And then
And
the
this is
next thing,
something you just touched up. But would there be a change in nutrition coming to winter?
yes. So that's when you would want hyper amounts of protein in the morning. That's when I would say you want a big protein breakfast in the morning. like more than what the average American would do. Most average Americans, 20 grams, 30 grams of protein. That's kind of like the normal if you're somewhat, on top of your nutrition. This is the time of the year where you're looking more like 50 or 60 grams if you're a 200-pound adult, right? And the reason for that is the next thing you want to do is you're going to go to work or you're going to start your day, right? You're going to be physically active. That's the point where you either want to go outside and you want to get some daylight exposure by removing glass and any interference with your eyes. The next thing you want to do is induce cold response, right? 10 minutes total for the whole procedure, right? You can either step outside for 10 minutes or do a cold plunge, but you want to get daylight and you want to combine that with cold. What that does is starts biophoton stimulation of UV light and infrared light. You could supplement UV light and infrared light. That's what I'm doing in the background. You could do that at your office building or at your workstation, wherever that might be. And what you've done there with the cold exposure and then supplementing some light, later in the day, is you're compounding that hydration effect that I talked about. UV light and infrared light causes the cells to be more hydrated, causes the cells to have more electrons. That's what you're going to cause so that you don't run into that brain fog stimulation, and it's going to keep the stress response low. In other words, cortisol will still be a little bit elevated because you have residual day and activities going on, but it's not going to be spiked. And the reason why it's not going to be spiked is because you're going to have hydration happening in the background with infrared light therapy and UV light therapy going on, or taking, every couple hours going outside or opening a window or something like that. To take a little break and get some sunlight.
And what would you say is the minimum amount of days for this to start kind of taking effect that you actually feel in the difference?
1 week. If you do it like I just laid out, about 1 week. If you're consistent with, hey, in the morning I get about 10 to 20 minutes of cold exposure, daylight exposure. The period before that, I've minimized my cortisol response and I've hydrated correctly. After that, I start my day normally, right? Don't change anything. In the middle of the day, get some cold exposure / daylight stimulation. And then throughout the day, just take some breaks or supplement some infrared or UV. If you just follow that, you'll notice something by day 4 or 5 easily, right? And then the most important thing is not inducing a cortisol response in the evening, right? The simplest hack for that is you repeat the same procedure, the same setup that you would in the morning, right? Change the mood so that the lighting is more relaxing to the biology in your body. Basically what that means is amber and red light, no overhead light stimulation. You can hack that with some blue light blocking glasses, right? So if you just put on some blue light blocking glasses and keep the lights a little bit on the dim side so that the brightness isn't getting through the glasses, that can also work in the morning, right? Like if you don't have,
would you go
like,
for somebody who's let's say don't want to refurbish all the house, some lamps that you can just put on ground?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's exactly what I teach people to do, right? You don't have to go all out and change all your light bulbs. Just turn off the overhead lights and buy 2 or 3 lamps for a room or 2, right? And put some amber and red light bulbs in the lamps and turn them on, right? Turn off the overhead ones, turn those on, and super cheap way to just feel that out. 2 or 3 nights of that. Like if you did all of that, right, the morning all the way to the end of the day, and you go to sleep correctly, you would probably notice a difference in probably less than 5 days. It would probably only be like 2 or 3 days if you're consistent about that. Again, this is not taking into account other individual circumstances of your environment, like electromagnetic fields or anything, but this lifestyle, life habit, and slight tweaks to the food. And the food really only looks like this, right? Lots of protein in the morning. We already talked about that. And then the systemic reduction of carbohydrates from the plant, meaning carbs that grow at the top of the plant are the first ones that be removed about this time of the year. Carbs that grow in the middle part of the plant, breads, those types of things, those are the ones that get removed right now this month. And then in the middle of winter, you're really only eating carbs that are growing on the ground or in the ground. Things like tubers, squashes, potatoes, all of those. Those are the things kind of that you shift towards. So that's really the only 2 shifts that I do from a nutritional aspect of like making sure that happens for various reasons. that don't necessarily have to do with neurotransmitters and things. They have more to do with digesting things correctly and just feeling well.
Yeah, I'm mindful of your time. I know I need to let you off, but the overall view is that winter is coming, you want it or not, and there will be consequences to this if you don't take an action now before it's getting too dark and you're getting too lazy, which you can easily omit with daily habits. Start getting out. You should have been getting out already if you have listened to our videos, and just implement some little changes like getting more protein earlier in the day and start to kind of getting rid of those carbs later in the day. I know holidays are coming and all those kind of things. You're gonna carb load anyway, so might as well do these things throughout the week, and then in holidays do whatever the hell you want, so you don't damage your physique as well. Uh, Hopefully, I made a justice on summary in that. Thank you for your time, David, as usual, and I'll see you next week.
Thank you. Have a great day.